Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on bank swallows. I'm really excited to have Heather Polowick here from Birds Canada. She's the bank swallow conservation coordinator for the Atlantic region for Birds Canada, and we're really excited to learn about bank swallows with Heather tonight. So thanks for joining us. And for everybody watching this recording later, thanks for listening. Before I go any further, I think it's important to acknowledge, at least where I'm seated here in Nova Scotia, is also known as Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people. And as an individual, but also as a member of the BNS, we're constantly honoring the land and learning our histories and doing what we can to foster reciprocal relationships with all Indigenous peoples, with all peoples and organisms and the lands and the waters that we live on here. So I feel like it's important to say that. And I guess without further ado, I'll hand it over to Heather to share their slides and start the talk. And we will have ample time for questions at the end.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my presentation should only be about 20-25 minutes long. So yeah, there should be time for questions and whatnot at the end. Hopefully some chatting about other swallows and whatever comes up. So share my screen. Is that, you can see that okay? Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So thank you for that great introduction, but I'll just say it again. So hi, everyone. I'm Heather Polowick. I'm the Bank Swallow Conservation Coordinator for Birds Canada, but I'm based in the Atlantic region of Canada. So today I'm going to talk to you about the bank swallow, a small aerial insectivore that has recently been added to our species at risk list and can be found throughout Atlantic Canada. So I'm joining you from Waterloo, Ontario, the current and traditional lands of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Neutral People, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Haldeman Treaty of 1784 and Treaty 3 from 1873. Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. We gratefully support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples that care for this land. Today's presentation will cover what Birds Canada does, what aerial insectivores are, and their current status. Then I will discuss bank swallow life history and why these birds are at risk. Next, I will just cover the conservation initiatives that Birds Canada is working on to help recover bank swallows and ways that everyone can help bank swallows and birds in general. And finally, there will be time for questions at the end. So for anyone unfamiliar with Birds Canada, we are a not-for-profit organization built on the contributions of thousands of members and volunteer citizen scientists. Our mission at Birds Canada is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada through scientific research, innovative partnerships, public engagement, science-based advocacy, and on-the-ground actions. And together with our supporters, we are Canada's voice for the birds. So on to our focus today. What are aerial insectivores? Aerial insectivores are a group of birds that catch insects while in flight. This group includes nightjars, such as the eastern whippoorwill and the common nighthawk, flycatchers, such as the Acadian flycatcher and olive-sided flycatcher, and lastly, swallows and swifts, such as the barn swallow and chimney swift. Because of their insect-eating strategies, aerial insectivores spend most of their time in flight, and their bodies are built perfectly for this lifestyle. They have long wings, short beaks, big eyes for spotting insects, short legs, and typically have shorter necks. All of these features add up to make these birds absolutely amazing aerial acrobats as well as speedy flyers. For example, One of my coworkers was doing bank swallow surveys along Lake Erie in Ontario this summer, and a bank swallow was keeping up with the boat at 23 kilometers per hour. Pretty amazing for a bird that only weighs 14 grams, or about the weight of 2 loonies. These birds have ferocious appetite for insects, with some eating upwards of 1,000 a day. They are migratory, meaning they spend their summers in North America and fly south for the winter. And unfortunately, this group is at risk. Which brings us to the status of aerial insectivores in Canada. So using nearly 50 years of data, the 2019 State of Canada's Birds report shows that Canada has lost between 40 and 60% of shorebird, grassland bird, and aerial insectivore populations, with aerial insectivores having the steepest decline of 59%. So we are losing aerial insectivore species at a faster rate than any other bird group in Canada. For example, over the last 10 years, 80% of the species newly listed as threatened or endangered in Canada were aerial insectivores. However, one positive thing this report showed us is how conservation efforts can work. Many species of waterfowl and birds of prey were at risk, but hunting regulations and banning DDT have helped these populations rebound. So all is not lost for aerial insectivores. Now that we know generally about aerial insectivores, let's discuss the focus species, the bank swallow. Bank swallows are the smallest swallow species in Canada. They have dark brown upper parts and white underparts with a large brown band across the upper chest, which is the key feature when distinguishing bank swallows from other swallow species. And females and males look identical. Here's a side-by-side comparison of all the swallows and swifts that you may see together, including the barn swallow, tree swallow, chimney swift, and cliff swallow. The clearest distinguishing feature for the bank swallow, again, is that brown collar across the chest. All other species have a plain chest. And a reminder that bank swallows are the smallest swallow species in Canada. So if you're having difficulty telling the species apart, you can try comparing the sizes of individuals within the flock. Their scientific name, Riparian riparia, means of the riverbank and refers to their nesting habitat, which is sandy banks, generally along rivers or lakes. They are one of the most widely distributed birds in the world, found on every continent except Antarctica and Australia. In many parts of its range, the bank swallow is called a sand martin. Bank swallows breed in Canada and in the southern half of the US during our summer months. In mid to late August, they begin the fall migration back to their winter grounds in South America. They stay in South America, mainly in the southern cone grasslands, until February, when spring migration back to Canada begins and they begin searching for their nest habitat. Bank swallows forage from dusk till dawn, often over lakes, rivers, and other water bodies or grasslands that support a diversity of aerial insects. They roost, which means a place where birds rest during the day or at night, in communal mixed species flocks, often in wetlands. Bank swallows look for sandy or loose substrate along near vertical embankments, along ocean coasts, lakes, rivers, and other wetlands. When suitable habitat is found, the male will dig a burrow roughly 30 centimeters deep into the bank, using his bill and feet over 4 to 5 days. Once he's finished with that, the female will come in and do the nest building. She will collect roots, rootlets, grasses, and feathers to build the nest. And bank swallows generally have 3 to 5 eggs per clutch and can have 1 to 2 clutches per season. Bank swallows begin breeding when they're about 2 years old, and they have a high site fidelity, meaning they tend to return to the same breeding sites year after year, especially if they're successful. They are colony nesters and will nest in groups ranging from a few individuals to thousands. Besides nesting in natural embankments, bank swallows will nest in human-created artificial habitat made from walls with perfectly sized tubes and in aggregate pits and courts. Now that we know a little bit more about bank swallows and their requirements, I will discuss their specific status and the threats that they and other aerial insectivores face. Sorry. So we saw already that as a whole, the group of aerial insectivores in Canada declined 59% over the last 40 years. Bank swallows, unfortunately, are the species declining at the fastest rate within the group of aerial insectivores. The federal bank swallow recovery strategy states that over the last 40 years, Canada has lost 98% of its bank swallow population, 98% loss. Bank swallows were listed as threatened across Canada in 2017 under the Species at Risk Act. This means that the current science and data trends on bank swallow populations shows that bank swallows are likely to continue to decline in numbers and become endangered unless some other form of conservation occurs. So why are aerial insectivores declining at such an alarming rate? The reasons are not fully understood yet, but one major threat is the decline of aerial insects, their food source. Insects are declining across the globe due to an increase in pesticide use, climate change, and habitat loss. Pesticide use has increased as humans switched from small diversified crop farms to large monoculture or one crop farms. Monoculture farms require more pesticides than diverse farms because the reduced diversity of crops reduces the diversity of insects that a farm can support. A reduction in insect diversity throws off the natural systems in place and one species, which allows for throws off the natural systems in place that keep populations balanced, often leading to an outbreak in one species of pest that is further controlled by more pesticides. The shift in insect diversity and abundance affects aerial insectivores. For example, a study from 2012 looking at well-preserved chimney swift poop found that their prey source had shifted since 1944. The researchers noticed less Caloptra or beetle remains and more Hemptura or true bug remains in the chimney swift poop. Beetles are the preferred food of aerial insectivores as they have a higher caloric value, meaning birds have to eat less of them to sustain their energy. True bugs, however, have a lower caloric value, meaning aerial insectivores have to forage for longer to get enough calories. This is concerning because it takes energy to catch prey, so the adults could have a net loss of energy when foraging on true bugs alone. The authors of the study argued that heavy use of DDT had decimated the Caloptra or beetle populations by the 1960s, leading to this drastic prey shift in chimney swifts. DDT is a non-selective insecticide, meaning it would kill any species of insect that it comes in contact with, and it was used heavily in North America until it was banned in 1972. You may know DDT as the main cause of decline for bald eagles and peregrine falcons, which led to its ban. Climate change is also impacting insect-bird relations by causing a phenological mismatch between birds and insects. A phenological mismatch is when interacting species change the timing of regularly repeated phases in their life cycles at different rates. For example, birds and insects use changes in the amount of daylight, food abundance, and temperature as cues for their life cycles. When days are shorter, temperatures are cooler, and food availability declines in South America, birds begin to migrate to their breeding grounds in Canada. At the same time, insects in Canada have warmer, longer days, triggering their next phase of their life cycle. Aerial insectivores have evolved with insects to arrive and breed during peak adult insect abundance. However, with climate change, seasonal cues may come earlier or later for insects or birds. So the timing between peak insect abundance and peak breeding bird season could no longer line up. This can have devastating impacts on nestling survival rates and on the number of attempted nests per breeding season if food is a limiting factor. And finally, the conversion of breeding habitats such as forests, grasslands, and wetlands to human landscapes is limiting the amount of available breeding habitat for insects. Climate change is also directly impacting aerial insectivore populations by creating more unpredictable and intense storms that can damage important habitats and blow migratory birds off course. Like Hurricane Wilma in 2005, which moved thousands of birds off course to Western Europe, including several hundred chimney swifts. The next year, chimney swift populations had declined by half of what it was the year before the storm. Further threats include the loss of breeding habitat across Canada and the loss of overwintering habitat in South America as human development continues to encroach on natural spaces. Bank swallows face even more direct impacts from climate change because with increased storm surges comes increased erosion along coastal shorelines and riverbanks where these birds nest. Increased erosion can make banks and shorelines too unstable for nesting and can make already established colonies collapse. To show a recent example of how much storm surges can impact bank swallow nesting habitat, here are photos from PEI National Park before and after Hurricane Fiona this year. PEI National Park says it's the worst damage to their dune systems in close to a century and could take over a decade for them to come back, for the sand to redeposit itself back in the location.
Good gracious.
The negative impact of increased erosion is heightened by coastal landowners choosing to rock armor their property. The picture on the left shows rock armoring, which involved using cement or large rocks to create a wall between the eroding land and the water, blocking bank swallows entirely from nesting in these areas. So, what's being done to help conserve bank swallows? Birds Canada is heavily involved in bank swallow research. In Ontario this summer, Birds Canada staff were capturing bank swallows to ban them, which helps estimate the survival of adult and juvenile birds. They also put MODIS tags on some individuals. MODIS tags, if you're not familiar, are basically radio tags. They send out a pulse signal, and when the bird flies past a MODIS tower, the tower pings it, and we get a point on a map, and with enough points, we can follow their migration path. And finally, they collected feather samples that can be used for an isotopic analysis, which can tell us a ton of information from where the bird hatched to what makes up the majority of the bird's diet. Most of bank swallow habitat is on private property, which means private landowners have the biggest ability to make change for their population. Currently in Atlantic Canada, rock armoring or using cement walls or blocks to prevent shoreline erosion is very common. We are planning to work with partners to create an example of a living shoreline site. Living shorelines is a technique for shoreline stabilization using a combination of natural materials such as coastal plants, wood debris, logs, sand, and rock placed strategically to slow wave action and protect the shore. The photo on the left shows an eroding shoreline before stabilization, and the photo on the right shows a mix of rocks and vegetation used to protect the shoreline and prevent erosion. The example site we will create will use similar techniques, but at a site where a bank swallow colony is already established. We hope that we can use this site to show how successful living shorelines can be at preventing severe erosion and how this more natural method to stabilizing shorelines can protect bank swallow nesting habitat. New this year in Atlantic Canada, we launched the Atlantic Canada Bank Swallow Monitoring Project. This project is designed to cover all of Atlantic Canada and locate and monitor all known bank swallow colonies every year. We are working with partners and other organizations across the region to help us achieve this monitoring project goal. This map shows the current colonies we know about, and the red markers indicate those colonies that were monitored this year. This project will need volunteers to help us cover all of those colonies, and I will talk about that more in the next section. So how can you help these awesome birds? You can help bank swallows directly by noticing them and keeping your distance in the summer. Bank swallows often nest near popular beaches or waterways in the summer. If you notice holes along the banks or see bank swallows flying around, please keep your distance from the birds and the colony, and please tell others to do the same. It is illegal to harm or disturb the nesting habitat of a migratory bird. If you see this happening, please report it. Further, if you are a coastal or waterfront property owner with erosion problems, please consider using natural techniques to help control the erosion rather than rock armoring. You can also consider volunteering with us. The Atlantic Canada Bank Swallow Monitoring Program only requires 1 visit, but up to 6 visits to a colony each year between May and July. The only equipment needed is binoculars, a pencil, a phone, or some way to get location information, and a visit can take less than 10 minutes. If you're interested in learning more about this program, you can email me or visit our website on Nature Counts. If you can't volunteer, but you happen to see a bank swallow colony, please report the location to me. My email is listed here, and it can be found on the Birds Canada website and on the Nature Counts website. To help all birds and the insects that many birds depend on, you can plant a garden. A bird garden has a few main features, including planting native plants with structural diversity. Native plants use less water and pesticides than non-native plants. Structural diversity includes things like leaving leaf litter, adding flowering plants, shrubs, and deciduous and conifer trees to gardens. The more diverse a garden, the more diverse its inhabitants. Water features are also great so that birds can drink and bathe, especially during the hot summer months. And finally, birdhouses can provide nesting habitat for cavity nesters, such as tree swallows. To help get you started, Birds Canada has created a website, birdgardens.ca, where you can plan your garden, identify what plants are native to your area, and see a list of potential bird visitors and more. Another easy way to help birds is to put stickers on your windows to prevent birds from colliding with them. A 2013 report found that an average of 22.4 million birds die annually in Canada from collisions with windows. During the day, birds will fly into windows if they can see the reflection of trees or vegetation, or if they can see plants inside the window. Nocturnal birds may fly into a window with a light shining through at night. This is because nocturnal birds use light from the moon to navigate, getting mixed up when they see light from a window. Stickers on the window break up the reflections and make the glass look like a barrier. In order for stickers to be effective, they need to be placed in a dense 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter pattern. They need to be applied to the outside of the window. There needs to be a high contrast between the glass and the stickers. And finally, the stickers have to cover the entire window. You can visit flap.org for more information. Again, in 2013, the same report estimated that cats kill an average of 196 million breeding birds annually in Canada. 116 million are killed by feral cats and 80 million are killed by domestic pet cats. Cats kill more breeding birds in Canada annually than any other source of death. In fact, cat predation, collisions with house and building windows, and collisions with vehicles and transmission lines all together cause 95% of breeding bird deaths in Canada. You can help with this by keeping cats indoors. If your cat is used to going outside, you can try putting your cat on a leash or building a cat patio or catio like the picture on the left. There's 3 cats in there for your cats to get outside safely. If you have barn cats or know of a feral colony, you can work with your local humane society if they run a trap, neuter, return program. Trap, neuter, return programs humanely reduce the cat population over time, and they can receive other medical care if needed. If your cat has to remain outdoors, a study published in 2021 found that providing your cats with high protein food and only 5 to 10 minutes of play a day will lower the amount of animals they kill. But it's best just to keep cats indoors if you can. Climate change is impacting us and every species around the globe, and it's having multiple effects on Canada's aerial insectivore populations. You can use your voice to vote for stronger climate change action and policies that can help protect bank swallows. And finally, you can get out and bird. If you're new to birding, here's a list of apps, websites, and books that can help you with identifying species. And of course, if you are out birding, there are several places you can report sightings and contribute to citizen science projects, including eBird, iNaturalist, and Nature Counts. Thank you to everyone who made it out to hear this presentation, and for everyone that's going to hopefully watch on the recording later on. A huge thank you to our partners, funders, and donors that help Birds Canada achieve our conservation goals. So now we have time for questions, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Heather. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can either put them in the chat or unmute and ask them. You can use the raise your hand function or just simply unmute and ask.
You're also welcome to email me later if anything comes up or you have any questions about the programs.
Heather, this is Soren. I have a question. So, do we know anything historically about bank swallows? Because it seems to me that we humans have created more banks than there probably was in the past, because of digging quarries and all the excavation kind of stuff that we do. So I'm just wondering if there is any data on bank swallows, in the past.
Hi, Soren. Yes, there is a little bit. The problem with bank swallows, or not the problem with bank swallows, but the problem with the data set that we had for most of our birds is through the I'm forgetting the name of the program right now, but basically it's you drive along to different sites and stop and listen on the roadsides. And the problem with that was it was mostly covering forested areas and not really where bank swallows nest, because they're often in quite public areas and private properties. So bank swallows got missed a lot in our breeding bird surveys. That's what they're called, breeding bird surveys, which happen every 10 years. And so they did get a little bit left out of that data set. We do know, though, that you're right. For a while, we had a little bit of an increase of bank swallows because of changes in roadways as well. So when they cut into the banks of hills to create roadways, they were actually creating bank swallow habitat. There was a temporary bump in it, but I think the rules have changed since then. And so they've gone back down to not nesting beside roads anymore. And the problem with pits and quarries, while they do nest in those sites, they tend to be a lot smaller size colonies just because the piles tend to be smaller. And there's currently research going on right now about whether or not they're as successful as areas that are near foraging grounds. So traditionally, their habitat is near wetlands and grasslands where they can forage, but the aggregate pits aren't necessarily near those sites. So there's some worry that the aggregate pits are actually a bit more of an ecological sink and not necessarily providing the same qualities of habitat that they get naturally.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that fully answered your question. I don't know too much about the historical data.
No, that sounds it makes sense. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for your question, Soren.
Yeah.
So Melissa has her hand up, and then there's a question in the chat after that.
Hi, Heather. Can you speak a little bit more about what a volunteer would do? I caught a little bit of it, and I went to get my phone to take a picture of your contact information, so I may have lost a little bit of the information you were giving.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for your interest in that. So all you really have to do, I don't know if the link got sent out, but if you go to our Nature Counts website, you can read more about it on there, and it has our protocol as well. But basically, if you sign up to be a volunteer, you can, if you know of a colony near you, you can email me the information and I can add that site, and then you can sign up to monitor that site, and you can sign up to monitor it in a continual year after year, or just once a year, or just for one summer. And all you have to do is, if you know where a colony is, you just go out and estimate the number of adults that you see in the area. So you can go at any time, and anytime between May and July. And then you just go there for about 10 minutes, count the birds. And we have a protocol that outlines how you would count the birds and estimate all the population size and all that stuff. And then you would just fill out, we have data forms that you can print out with you and bring, and it's just a matter of filling in all the boxes and then sending that information to me, or you can enter it in onto Nature Counts as well. Nature Counts has all of the information, but yeah, so basically it would be a 10-minute survey once a year or once ever, if that's what you wanted to do. So there's minimal commitment. Yeah. Did that answer it? I'm sorry. There's so
Sure,
many
yeah.
things to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm new to the area, so I'm not aware personally of any bank swallow colonies, and I don't know if anyone else does, that they could pass the information on to me. And I guess, how do you ensure that there aren't double counts, like people doing two of the same or one of the same colonies?
Right. Yeah. So if as long as people sign up for the colony that they're monitoring, it appears red on the map instead of green, and it will say that this colony is already being monitored. So if you are interested, you don't necessarily have to find your own colony. We have a ton that haven't been monitored yet. So you can go to the Nature Counts website and then check out our map. And then each little green marker has a colony there, and you can pick the one that's closest to you and sign up to monitor that one.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from John that says, have you any thoughts on how big an area needs to be set aside in a garden to create a refuge for insects? Have you any thoughts on differences between the ways trees contribute to insect populations?
Oh, good question. Insects are not my specialty. So I'm not sure about the size of a garden, but I think anything that you can do to help insect populations is great. So even if you only have a small space, like I only have a balcony here, but if you can buy native plants that flower in different times of the year, so something that flowers early spring, something that flowers in the summer, and something that flowers in the fall, that's probably the best way to help insects specifically, because then you're giving them a food source throughout the entire year. And I'm not sure so much about trees and how they contribute to insect populations, but I did read about farms and how smaller farms used to have those hedgerows beside them of like conifer trees, and just like England has a lot of it still, where their farms are all lined with hedgerows, and those hedgerows are apparently really, really great insect breeding areas. So I would think that trees and shrubs would have some insect breeding potential. But not positive about that.
I have a question, Heather. I'm wondering if you can show us that map of colonies. Would it be possible
Absolutely.
to pull that up and share your screen, maybe? And maybe then we
Definitely.
can just see what's around the valley area that we're in.
So so you know what? Maybe I can get it up on Nature Counts. We can zoom in a bit more. So again, this project was just launched last year, so we don't have a ton
There's
of
still
colonies
things around Wolfville, though, it looks like.
throughout. Yeah, there's a few there.
Okay, so it looks like there's a few in our area that need monitoring.
Yeah, and hopefully more to come and more to be found. We haven't really started exploring this other coast yet around Liverpool, and I don't think we've had many people looking for us up near Sherbrooke or in Cape Cod area. So we have, Cape Breton area. So we have quite a lot of more research to do still. So if you're ever out and camping or hiking and notice a colony, you can always just report that to us too. And you don't have to monitor. We're just trying to find them all and hopefully eventually monitor them all.
Wow. Do we have any other questions for Heather or general discussion?
We'll just say for Melissa, if you just go to our Nature Counts website, you can go to the About and then Resources, and that's where the protocol will be. So it will tell you exactly what we're looking for. And I think it's only about 12 pages. So it's not too much information. A lot of it I covered already. So
Great, thank you. Sorry.
Was somebody trying to ask a question?
Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself, but I guess I didn't. I just had a question about the procedure for doing the count. Is this a standard procedure that is carried out by consultants, for instance, when they're doing a survey for endangered species for a particular project that's about to happen in the area of habitat of endangered species? Is it the same sort of procedure?
Yeah, I would say so. So we based it off of the Ontario research program, and then off of previous research about bank swallows. So for example, we do have 2 levels of research that we're hoping to collect. And the first level is the simplest one, where we just go out and do that point count of an estimation of how big the group is. So it would be like 0 to 50. And then we have a second level where that one is monitoring or looking more into the burrows. So historical research has shown that about 50% of the burrows are actually being used within a colony. And so when we asked volunteers to go out there and look at the colony, look at the burrows and distinguish between an active burrow and an inactive burrow. And again, all of this information is in the protocol. But that's quite standard for bank swallow monitoring. And we are working with partners across Atlantic Canada, trying to get everyone onto the same page and doing the same monitoring program so that we can compare it across the province and notice the changes throughout. So we do have partners scattered across, I shouldn't just say Nova Scotia, across Atlantic Canada that are helping us with this and that are also following this protocol. So it's going to be a really big data set eventually.
Thank you.
So there's another question in the chat from John, wondering if making rivers flow more quickly influences insect levels, though he admits it's an unfair question, as you already said, you are not an insect expert.
Thank you, John. That's true. But I do believe that is correct because insects breed in still water generally. So the faster a river flows, for sure, it would wipe out the eggs, it would wipe out the adults that might still be hanging around in there. So definitely climate change and these increases of storm surges are going to affect insects as well. Yeah. Especially if it gets drier and hotter.
So Heather, if people have more questions, the best way to reach you is your email, which I did put in the chat.
Yep. My email would be great. Again, through those websites as well. Nature Counts, my email is everywhere on there. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. I'm always happy to look things up if I don't know the answers to and try to figure them out. So yeah, any questions are good. And thank you for letting me speak today. I hope you guys learned something new.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks everyone for joining. We'll certainly circulate the recording and perhaps the slide deck and the links to how to get involved with bank swallows and the map of the local sites. I know our friends at the Jijiwaktuk Watershed Alliance found a colony, which I think I saw on the map there. So it'll be good to keep an eye out for these cute little and threatened birds in our area.
Yeah, that help get rid of the mosquitoes and bugs for you. So they're good to have around.
Great. Okay, well, I think we'll call it an evening and wish everyone well. And as for the BNS, we will have a few things coming up in October, and we'll have a newsletter and information circulated to our listserv, to our e-newsletter, which I put a link in the chat to join. And you can find that on our website and on Facebook as well. So there will be more things to come as the fall colors change.
Oh, and Caroline, perhaps I can mention, because this might be interesting to people who are listening. I've been talking to, this is Melissa, I've been talking to Caroline about doing a presentation on window treatments to prevent bird strikes. I used to be a volunteer with flap.org, which is where your photographs came from. And I've had experience using different ways to put